On the cold morning of January 15th, 2018, the staff of the Park Lane Hilton in London opened the door to a hotel bathroom and found one of the most haunting voices of the 90s lying lifeless in the tub. The woman who had once electrified the world with a cry that seemed to slice straight through the human soul was suddenly silent. The coroner's report would later describe it as an accidental drowning with alcohol intoxication. But nothing about the scene felt simple. To those who knew her, the tragedy seemed woven from years of unspoken battles, bruised memories, and a fragile spirit that had carried the weight of fame too early and too intensely. It was not just the end of a life. It was the final chapter of a mystery that had been building since her childhood. Dolores Mary Eileen O'Riordan was born in County Limerick on September 6, 1971. The youngest of 7 children in a devout Irish Catholic family. Her early world was one of strict boundaries, quiet fields, and a home marked by both love and strain. Her father, Terence, had suffered a disabling brain injury in a motorcycle accident years before her birth, leaving her mother, Eileen, to shoulder the heavy responsibility of raising the children almost entirely on her own. That sense of burden settled into the walls of the house, shaping the emotional atmosphere Dolores grew up in. She learned early that life was something you survived rather than celebrated. As a child, she was sensitive, shy, and almost painfully earnest. Music became her refuge long before she fully understood the impulse behind it. She played keyboards at school, learned hymns at church, and began writing melodies in her head as if they were secret messages only she could hear. By the time she was 10, her voice had already developed that unmistakable tremble, a sound that carried both strength and vulnerability in the same breath. Yet underneath this gift, a darker shadow was forming. Years later, she revealed that beginning around 1981, when she was only a young girl, she suffered sexual abuse at the hands of someone she trusted. She never named the person publicly, but spoke about how the trauma followed her for decades. It altered her sense of self, filled her with shame, and created emotional storms she could not yet articulate. Childhood had given her a voice, but it had also given her ghosts. School was difficult. She struggled to fit in, often feeling out of place among her peers. But she carried within her an unshakable hunger to be heard, a destiny that only became visible when she responded to a classified ad in 1990 for a band searching for a new singer. The group was called the Cranberries Sauce, a small Limerick band founded by brothers Mike and Noel Hogan, along with drummer Fergal Lawler. Dolores arrived at their audition wearing a tracksuit and clutching a keyboard. She said little, simply played them a melody she had written, and began to sing. The room changed instantly. Her voice was fragile yet fierce, almost otherworldly. They offered her the spot immediately. By 1991. The band, now renamed the Cranberries, began recording demos that quickly drew local attention. Their early sound had an innocence to it, a dreamlike quality mixed with raw emotion. But Dolores was no ordinary frontwoman. She was magnetic, unpredictable, and intensely expressive. When she stepped onto a stage, her voice filled the room with an emotional gravity that felt far larger than her tiny frame. Still, behind every performance, there lingered a tremor of fear that never fully left her. She had the voice of a warrior and the heart of art, someone still healing from childhood wounds. Their first major breakthrough came in 1992, when they released the single Dreams. It floated into the world with a soft glow, and audiences across Ireland began to take notice. But nothing prepared them for what happened next. In 1993, their ballad Linger suddenly erupted on American radio, swept across college campuses, and climbed international charts. Dolores became the face and soul of a new generation of alternative rock. Her voice, trembling yet powerful, seemed to speak directly to every listener's quiet sadness. Everybody else is doing it, so why can't we? Became a global success, catapulting the shy Irish girl into a world of interviews, photo shoots, and sold-out shows. But fame was not a gentle companion. As 1994 arrived, the band recorded Zombie, a protest song Dolores wrote in response to the March 20th, 1993, Warrington bombings that killed 2 young children. She poured rage, grief, and frustration into the song, creating one of the most iconic rock anthems of the decade. When it was released in September 1994, it exploded across MTV and radio stations worldwide. Dolores was transformed. She was no longer just a singer. She was a phenomenon. Yet inside, something was breaking. She began suffering panic attacks, insomnia, and overwhelming bouts of anxiety. The demands of global fame clashed violently with her private nature, and the weight of childhood trauma grew heavier under the spotlight. Some reports suggest that by 1995, she had developed severe eating disorders driven by stress and pressure. She pushed her body to its limits on tour, often performing while exhausted or ill. The media praised her as a fearless icon, but close friends noticed a deepening sadness behind her eyes. Her romantic life added another layer of intensity. In July 1994, she married Don Burton, a tour manager for the band Duran Duran. Their marriage brought periods of warmth, stability, and family life, and together they would eventually have 3 children. But it also introduced new challenges, including relentless touring schedules, relocations, and the clash between her fragile mental health and the demands of motherhood under scrutiny. Dolores loved fiercely, but she often felt torn between personal peace and public expectation. By the late 90s, the cracks in her emotional foundation widened. Touring became increasingly overwhelming, and the pressure of being the face of a global band grew unbearable. In 1996, she suffered what many believe was a full psychological breakdown, retreating into isolation and canceling major commitments. Rumors swirled about her condition, some exaggerated, others painfully accurate. She later admitted that she felt completely lost during this period, trapped between the girl she once was and the icon she had become. As the decade came to an end, her relationship with fame grew even more conflicted. The world saw a star. She felt like she was disappearing as the world entered a new century. Dolores O'Riordan tried to steady herself, but the emotional ground beneath her never stopped shifting. The years of relentless touring, media scrutiny, and the internal storms she had carried since childhood began to blur together. By 1999, she was struggling visibly, often retreating from the public eye and canceling appearances. The band announced a hiatus in 2003, a break that many interpreted as a quiet collapse rather than a creative pause. The Cranberries had sold over 40 million records, yet behind the curtain, Dolores felt spiritually empty, emotionally drained, and unable to face the machine she had helped create. The early 2000s became a volatile period marked by instability and raw vulnerability. She attempted a solo career, hoping that independence might offer healing, or at least a different kind of expression. In 2007, she released her first solo album, Are You Listening? An intimate collection shaped by trauma, motherhood, and the longing for peace. Critics praised its honesty, but the release did little to quiet the storm inside her. She spoke openly during this time about her childhood abuse and the psychological scars it left. The memories resurfaced in waves, sometimes triggered by interviews, other times arriving unprovoked in the quiet hours of night. The more she tried to control her past, the more it seemed to resurface. Her marriage to Don Burton, once a place of refuge, began to fracture under the weight of her instability. Raising 3 children while navigating the aftermath of global fame became an impossible task. The emotional distance grew, and by 2013, After nearly 2 decades together, their relationship had deteriorated beyond repair. Some close to her suggested that the split marked the beginning of her final decline, a moment when she lost what little grounding she had left. In September 2014, the couple officially separated. The news devastated her. She had built her identity around her love for her family, and now that foundation was gone. Only months later, on November 10, 2014, her private anguish erupted into public scandal. Dolores was arrested at Shannon Airport after an incident on an Aer Lingus flight in which she reportedly assaulted a flight attendant and headbutted a police officer who attempted to intervene. Witnesses described her as disoriented and distressed, shouting incoherently as authorities tried to restrain her. The incident shocked Ireland and dominated headlines across Europe. The world saw a fallen star in chaos, but the reality was deeper. Dolores was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and doctors testified that she had been in a manic state during the incident, overwhelmed by psychological trauma, exhaustion, and emotional instability. She pleaded guilty in December 2015, and the court ruled that she should receive medical treatment rather than imprisonment. After the airport scandal, she attempted to regain control of her life by pouring herself into music again. The Cranberries reunited in 2012, but their most significant comeback arrived with the April 2017 release of Something Else, a haunting acoustic reinterpretation of their greatest hits. Dolores' voice, now more fragile and weathered, carried a deeper ache. Fans felt the authenticity and gravitated toward the emotional resurrection of her art. For a brief moment, it seemed like she had found a sliver of stability. She gave interviews about better mental health management, sobriety, and a renewed focus on creativity. But behind the carefully chosen words, a darker truth lingered. She was still fighting. She was still hurting. She was still fragile. During this same period, she became entangled in a complicated on-again, off-again relationship with musician Ole Koretsky. The romance was passionate, emotionally charged, and at times unstable. Some reports suggest that she felt both deeply connected and uncomfortably dependent on him, a dynamic that added to her emotional volatility. At the same time, she was navigating chronic physical pain caused by back and spine issues that had worsened over the years of touring. In May 2017, the Cranberries were forced to cancel most of their European and North American tour dates due to her medical condition. Publicly, the explanation was physical injury. Privately, both her mental and physical health were deteriorating. In the final months of 2017, Dolores oscillated between moments of brightness and overwhelming despair. She worked on new material, collaborated with the band Bad Wolves on a modern reinterpretation of Zombie, and made plans for future projects. On January 14, 2018, she traveled to London for recording sessions. Friends later recalled that she had seemed optimistic that week, speaking about recovery, reconciliation, and creative possibilities. But the truth of mental illness is that its storms do not always announce themselves. Less than 24 hours later, on January 15, 2018, Dolores was gone. The coroner's inquest would later reveal that she had consumed a significant amount of alcohol in her hotel room before slipping beneath the water of the bathtub, unable to fight her way back to consciousness. It was ruled accidental, but to her fans and to those who loved her, it felt like the culmination of decades of emotional struggle, untreated wounds, and the brutal pressures of global fame carried by someone too sensitive for the world that demanded so much from her. Her death sent shockwaves through the music industry. Artists across generations mourned the loss of a voice unlike any other. The Cranberries released their final album, In the End, on April 26, 2019, built from her last recorded vocals. It served as a haunting farewell, a fragile, beautiful echo of a life marked by pain, resilience, and extraordinary artistic force. Dolores O'Riordan's legacy is not simply a story of tragedy. It is the story of a girl from rural Ireland who transformed her suffering into a global voice. Her music carried the weight of unspoken wounds, unhealed trauma, and a fierce desire to rise above the past. Even in her darkest moments, her artistry reached millions, offering solace to those who recognized the tremble of their own pain in her voice. She remains one of the most distinctive singers of her generation, a symbol of vulnerability, rebellion, and unfiltered emotion. Her life was a fragile masterpiece, shaped by beauty and brokenness, by innocence and scars, by light that never fully escaped the shadows. And even now, long after the final notes have faded, Dolores O'Riordan continues to be a mystery that echoes across time, reminding the world that some voices do not die. They linger in the aftermath of her passing. The world began to re-examine the emotional map of Dolores O'Riordan's life, tracing the patterns that had shaped her inner world long before fame ever found her. Her childhood trauma, revealed publicly only in her later interviews, suddenly appeared not as a footnote, but as a central force in her story. Psychologists who analyzed her life from afar noted that survivors of early abuse often carry invisible fractures into adulthood, fractures that widen under pressure, instability, or overwhelming exposure. Dolores had lived with those fractures throughout her ascent, and the spotlight that illuminated her brilliance also magnified every vulnerability she tried to hide. In the months following January 15, 2018, her family spoke gently about the quiet version of her that existed away from cameras. She tended gardens, wrote in notebooks filled with lyrics, and spent long hours walking through fields when she was home in Ireland. She was at her happiest when surrounded by nature, far from the noise of celebrity culture. Fans had always known her as the fierce, uncontainable force behind Zombie and Linger, but her loved ones knew a woman who cherished simplicity, privacy, and soft moments of ordinary life. That contrast became part of the mystery that defined her legacy. The world idolized the icon. The people closest to her mourned the human being. Her hometown of Ballybricken turned into a sanctuary of remembrance. Murals appeared across Limerick. Candlelight vigils filled the streets. Her funeral, held on January 23, 2018, drew thousands, but the service itself was intimate, marked by music, prayer, and a profound stillness that seemed to envelop the room. It was a farewell steeped in sorrow, yet illuminated by the enduring beauty of what she had left behind. For many, her voice had been a companion during their loneliest years, a sound that understood their pain, even when no one else did. That connection did not fade. If anything, it grew. When the Cranberries released In the End on April 26, 2019, the world listened as if hearing a final transmission from a distant star. Her vocals on the album were both fragile and luminous, a reminder that even in her last creative moments, she was reaching for hope. The surviving band members later said that completing the album was an emotional ordeal. They described hearing her voice in the studio as both comforting and heartbreaking. It felt as though she were still with them, guiding them, even as they faced the inescapable truth of her absence. The album was nominated for a Grammy, a poignant acknowledgement that her artistry remained powerful enough to move the world even after she was gone. In the years that followed, Dolores became a symbol of a generation's emotional landscape. Her music transcended genres and eras, resurfacing on social media, film soundtracks, and global playlists. Younger listeners discovered her voice through digital platforms, unaware that the woman who sang with such haunting force had already left the world. Zombie began trending repeatedly in the late 2010s and early 2020s, fueled by political unrest and cultural movements that found new relevance in its message. Linger became a soundtrack for nostalgia, heartbreak, and quiet introspection, shared by millions who had never lived through the 90s, but felt drawn to its timeless ache Her influence extended beyond music. Mental health advocates embraced her story as a testament to the need for compassion, awareness, and open dialogue about trauma and emotional suffering. She had spoken honestly about depression, addiction, intrusive memories, and the psychological unraveling that fame can accelerate. Her willingness to reveal her inner battles provided solace to those facing similar demons. Some clinicians even cited her life in academic discussions about bipolar disorder, childhood trauma, and the long-term effects of psychological suppression. In this strange way, her vulnerability became a tool for healing in others. Yet mystery remains at the core of her narrative. Fans continue to debate the emotional and psychological factors that converged on her final night. Some believe she was on the cusp of a personal renaissance, pointing to the creative plans she had made on January 14, 2018. Others think the weight of her past had simply grown too heavy. Supporters of the accidental drowning conclusion emphasize the medical clarity of the inquest, but there will always be those who feel that the tragedy holds unanswered questions. This sense of ambiguity has become part of her mythos, a reminder that human suffering is rarely tidy, and that some stories resist simple explanations. Through every interpretation, one truth remains constant. Dolores was a rare kind of artist, one whose emotional honesty was both her superpower and her undoing. She did not perform from the surface. She sang from the deepest part of her being. Her music bore the imprint of every joy and wound she ever carried. It resonated because it was real. That authenticity came with a cost, but it also carved her legacy into the emotional memory of millions. Today, when listeners return to her voice, they are met not with the polished veneer of celebrity, but with the sound of a soul trying to find its way through darkness. Her vibrato carries the trembling sincerity of someone who wanted to be strong, but often felt fragile. Her lyrics reflect the longing of someone searching for a home that always seemed just out of reach. Her performances reveal the courage of someone who stood on a global stage, even when her heart felt too heavy to lift. Through all her battles, she never stopped giving the world pieces of herself. Dolores O'Riordan's life is remembered as a knife, delicate intersection of brilliance and pain, triumph and vulnerability, art and anguish. She embodied the beauty of imperfection and the tragedy of a spirit stretched beyond its limits. Her story remains a testament to the complexities of human emotion and the price of being extraordinarily gifted in a world that does not always understand the weight artists carry. Long after her passing, her voice still floats through time like a shimmering apparition, haunting, comforting, and eternally recognizable. It rises from radios, concert halls, headphones, and quiet bedrooms around the world. It lingers in the air, trembles in the memory, and echoes in the hearts of those who found solace in her sound. Dolores did not just sing songs. She carved emotional truths into the world. She gave a generation a language for its grief and a melody for its longing. Her life may have been marked by shadows, but her legacy shines with a strange, unbreakable light. And as long as her music lives, her story will never end. It will remain a mystery, a melody, and a reminder that even the most fragile souls can change the world.